Welcome back to Law and Crime Live, everybody. And speaking of live, we are going to be live today in the Atlanta courtroom for the case of Claude Tex McIver, a prominent attorney who is charged with the murder of his wife, Diane McIver, by shooting her from the back seat of a moving car. His team is saying, however, that this was all a tragic accident. We do have a live feed into the courtroom. Trial has not started yet. It's been late a couple of past few days, mostly due to a late juror. I'm not sure if that's the issue today. They might be just working on some administrative issues. But as soon as we do have the feed, we'll make sure to go to it. But before we get into the McIver case, I do want to talk about another case that we've been covering here on Law and Crime. It was supposed to start today. It's about, unfortunately, an officer-involved shooting out of Florida. It's the case of Newman Raja. He was supposed to have a stand-your-ground hearing today, but that has been delayed. It has now been pushed back till May. However, we do want to show you a short preview of that case. Take a look.
A former police officer who shot and killed a stranded motorist claims it's a classic case of self-defense. He'll be making his case in a stand-your-ground hearing this week in Palm Beach, Florida. Newman Raja is charged with manslaughter and attempted murder in the shooting death of Corey Jones, a beloved local musician. Jones was standing outside of his broken-down SUV on the phone with AT&T roadside assistance when the defendant approached him in an unmarked car in plain clothes. The defendant claimed in a 911 call the victim pointed a gun at him.
I came out, I saw him come out with a handgun, I gave him commands, I identified myself, and he turned, pointed the gun at me, started running, I shot him.
But prosecutors say the defendant's story isn't the whole truth. AT&T roadside assistance recorded the service call from Jones and showed the defendant may have lied.
And what's the name on it?
Corey Jones.
And what can I do for you tonight?
I need to get a tow. I'm broke down. Stop. I'm good. I'm good. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. There's gunshots.
Raja's attorneys intend to use recent changes to Florida's controversial Stand Your Ground law, which requires the prosecution to prove it wasn't self-defense before the trial. I'm Rachel Stockman for Law and Crime.
Really, really chilling when you hear that video. So again, that case has been delayed till May, but we're going to carefully follow it. And as soon as there is an update, we'll make sure to let you know. Let's focus again on the Tex McIver case. That's our live trial of the day. We are going to be in the courtroom. It is going to continue today. So let's talk about what we can expect. Again, I'm here with attorney Jonna Spilbor. Jonna, before the break, we were talking about how so many witnesses have come forward and been asked, what was Diane like? She's a shrewd businesswoman. She seemed to pick on people a little bit. She also picked on Tex a little bit about his weight. Why does this matter again? I mean, what is the prosecution trying to show here with this evidence?
I think it's a tall burden when you want to prove to strangers that a prominent attorney, now, you know, not for nothing, like attorneys are people too, but attorneys are held to a higher standard. Like, we're not allowed to commit crimes. We're not allowed to do those things and still keep our license. So you'd have to assume that he was an upstanding citizen before this happened, or he wouldn't be an attorney, number one. So how does the prosecution get past that? How does one upstanding citizen kill another upstanding citizen? There has to be a reason for it. If it's not an accident and they're trying to prove
because she teased him about his weight?
You know, come on. Not enough. Just like this financial motive. They're dancing around this issue. Nobody has honed it. There's been no smoking gun, and I don't mean that tongue-in-cheek.
Right.
There's been no smoking gun here. The prosecution's not really doing its job in proving that this was intentional.
If they're going all different ways, saying, oh, it was a financial motive, you know, they had a bad relationship, she teased him, and then there was even a little bit of a flavor of he might have been two-timing her. I mean, there was even conversation in the days after.
How old was he?
He was getting a masseuse who came to the house.
Good
Why
for
they're
him.
Introducing a million different theories, but is the jury going to get a bad taste in their mouth from that?
I think what will happen is they won't be able to focus in on one. And what does that create, Jesse? Reasonable doubt. You know, this is one case where, in the beginning, I thought it was almost going to be a slam dunk for the prosecution. And the more the prosecution dug into its case, if I were a juror, I'd be changing my mind. This is very plausibly an accident, and the prosecution's not done enough to show that it wasn't.
Okay, so let's strip it all down right now, okay? Here we go, Jonna.
All right.
If he's not found guilty of murder, which a lot of people say they're not proving their case, could he be found guilty of a lesser charge, such as involuntary manslaughter or reckless conduct, which was what he was originally charged with?
Right.
And could he also be found guilty of 3 counts of influencing witnesses? Because I think there's more weight to those charges.
So that's a great question. And if they allowed the lesser included offense as a jury instruction here, he most likely would be convicted of that. Because
meaning, if the jury, if you don't find him guilty of murder,
yeah.
you could find him guilty of involuntary manslaughter.
If you don't think this was intentional, you could find his conduct so reckless that it brought about the death of his wife, and that would be involuntary or perhaps even voluntary, but I'm going to go with an involuntary manslaughter charge.
I agree with you. I don't think there's any doubt that this was reckless. He was the one who shot her, but
yeah.
Jonna, stand by. As we wait for the live feed into the courtroom, and we are waiting for that, I want to replay you a very special witness from this case, a man who knew Diane McIver probably better than anyone, just as much as Tex. Her personal assistant, Terry Brown. He took the stand a couple of weeks ago, and he provided a very, very compelling testimony and a great insight into who this woman was. We're going to show you some of his testimony right now.
Well, with Diane being deceased, our CFO about 4 months later resigned, and those are basically the 2 people that I supported. So basically my job has been gone for about a year, and it just took them this long to terminate me.
And when did you start working in the courtroom? Or you was in practice at that point?
August 16th, 2010.
Okay. And so you worked there about 7.5 years?
Yes.
Now, while working there for the 7.5 years, can you tell the jury what your position as an executive assistant entailed?
Well, I supported the CFO and the president, which was Diane. I supported her professionally and personally. So I did whatever it is that she needed done to get through the day. Was my role for her. And for the CFO, I did most of his business dealings, as well as they both owned outside businesses, and I helped them with those businesses as well.
And you said you worked with the CFO. Who was the CFO?
Oh, Richard Harrell.
And did you work as an executive assistant for anybody else in the building?
If Mr. Corey needed something, he would come to me from time to time. So I did do things for him as well, yes.
But primarily you worked with Ms. McIver?
Yes.
Now, you said you worked with her business, I guess, dealings, as well as you were her personal assistant.
Correct.
Why don't you tell the jury what you mean by being her personal assistant?
If there was an issue with anything at the house, either of the houses, she would call me and I would arrange to have whatever the issue was fixed. I mean, I ordered her clothes, I ordered her makeup, I ordered her coffee. I did everything for her except I did not pick up her laundry and I did not do her grocery shopping. Other than that, I pretty much supported everything that she needed throughout.
That was some previous testimony in the Claude Tex McIver case. We are waiting for the live feed in the courtroom. As soon as we have it, we'll make sure to go right to it. We don't want you to miss anything. But Jonna, he was a great witness. We're going to play some more of his testimony. But I've noticed that the prosecution has been bringing out some, how shall I say this, unnecessary witnesses, some witnesses that I'm not really sure what the jury's getting out of it. What's going on here?
I'm so glad you said that because I thought the same exact thing. Nobody here is contesting that Mrs. McIver was a terrible person or not a nice person. Like, nobody is saying that. I don't know what weight or what evidence he brings to this case that's going to be useful for the jury, except, to show maybe she was very organized.
Well, he was actually a good witness. We'll show him a little bit later, but I have more of an issue for somebody like yesterday. We saw Nicole Carroll, and she was working with the gun that was at issue. She said we couldn't put DNA on it. We know who shot. We know who shot Diane, and one of the reasons there was no DNA was because he shot through a plastic bag.
Right.
Why do I care? Is this just establishing their case?
It really is unnecessary, and I'm not so sure why they're bringing in all this filler. I mean, they could have stipulated. In fact, part of this whole defense is that Tex McIver is not contesting that he was the one who shot the gun. We know he shot the gun. That's a no-brainer. And we know that he shot it through a plastic bag, which actually I also think helps him because the gun was in the glove compartment in a plastic bag. Like he he wasn't, he didn't have it on his side the whole entire time. Like, I'm just waiting for the right moment to shoot my wife.
I'll play devil's advocate, though. If he had it in a plastic bag, maybe he didn't intend to shoot her in the car. Maybe, why would he have it in a plastic bag?
Well, because if you get pulled over for speeding and you have to go into your glove compartment, you don't want the nice police officer to all of a sudden see.
That is a plausible explanation, John, and that's why we love having you on.
That's why you got me.
That's why you get paid the big bucks. See, that's a great way of looking at it, because people could look at that and say, "Oh, he was planning to kill her. Maybe he didn't plan to shoot her in the car, but if he had it in that plastic bag, he didn't want that DNA on him." But that was a great way of looking at that.
You're a good devil's advocate.
I try. Jonna, stand by. We are going to take a quick commercial break, but when we come back, hopefully we'll jump right into the courtroom. We don't want you missing anything in this case. It's really been a very, very interesting one to follow. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back, everybody. We're covering the Claude Tex McIver case out of Atlanta, a prominent attorney who was on trial for the murder of his wife, Diane McIver, by shooting her from the back seat of a moving car. Now, his team is saying that this was all a tragic accident and wasn't intentional. You hear the defense always saying that he took out his gun, or I should say Diane, who was in the front passenger seat, and Danny Joe Carter, who was their friend who was driving. They were driving through a bad area, a bad part of town. He asked Diane to take his gun out of the front console. She gave it to him. He fell asleep while holding the gun. There was a bump in the road, allegedly, and he woke up startled, and the gun went off, and he accidentally shot his wife. The prosecution is saying that this is all baloney and that he actually intentionally wanted to kill her for financial gain. That's really the motive they're going for. And they're also sprinkling in a little bit of other things, that they had a rocky relationship, that Diane was mean to him, that she was a shrewd businesswoman. So kind of those things. And what I want to tell you, this is Law and Crime. I want to actually tell you everything he's charged with. So he's charged with murder, felony murder, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, and 3 counts of influencing witnesses. That's right, the state believes that he tried to cover it up. As we wait for the live feed, we are carefully monitoring the courtroom. As soon as it starts, we're going to make sure to go into that case. We don't want you to miss anything. I want to again play for you some of the testimony of Terry Brown. This was the executive assistant for Diane McIver, a person that knew her very, very well and knew about her relationship with Tex McIver. We're going to continue playing you some of his testimony. Take a look.
Or deal with any of her financial information, status, all of her financial stuff.
I did all of her financial stuff.
Now, why don't you tell the jury what you mean by you did all of her financial stuff?
I was not a signer on her checking accounts, but I had online access to all of her checking accounts. I scanned her mail every day, so when bills came, I opened her bills myself, and we kept them in a folder in her office. Twice a month, the bills came out. I sat down with the bills and the checking accounts, figured out where the money needed to be, and then when she come into the office, I would meet with her to say, you got to pay bills today, you have to move this money around to do that, and you need to do it today. And then I would follow up with her, because I could check online if she paid them, so if she didn't do it, I would hound her until she paid the bills.
Now, you said you could check online or make sure she paid the bills.
Correct.
How were you able to do that?
I had online access to all of her. I mean, I could have paid them, but she just liked to pay her own bills.
Was she, did she like to follow where her money went?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Was money, that was something that was very important to Diane?
It was.
Okay. And you said you had access to her accounts. How did you have access to all of her online accounts?
I had my own password and log on, different from hers.
Okay. And that was able to give you the same access that she had?
Correct.
Okay. Now, with doing all of her finances, paying bills or getting bills ready to be paid, did you document or record all of the payments and everything else that she had to do each month with her money?
Yes.
Okay. And how did you do that?
About 2 months after I went to work for her, I created a checkbook register. It looked just like a checkbook register on Excel. And everything that I did financially, I had an Excel spreadsheet for each of her accounts. And every time a check was written or a deposit was made, I handled it just like a checkbook, except it was in Excel and a spreadsheet.
Again, that's Terry Brown providing some testimony about his interactions with the victim and also the defendant in this case. We're going to talk about Tex McIver in a minute, but here on Law and Crime, we always try to bring you breaking news, and we do want to let you know that we are carefully monitoring another situation out of Florida. This was the case of Donald Smith. We covered it here on Law and Crime. This was a man who was convicted in a really heinous crime of abducting, raping, and murdering an 8-year-old girl named Cherish Periwinkle. He was convicted in a very short time by the jury in that case, and they ultimately recommended the death penalty for him. Today, there is going to be a Spencer hearing. What this means is before the judge actually imposes the death penalty, which was recommended by the jury, both sides, particularly the defense, are allowed an opportunity to provide some more arguments and evidence. And you will know that the defense will try to introduce some more evidence about why Mr. Smith should not be sentenced to death. Now, we are not 100% sure we can cover that yet. We're not 100% sure about the feed in the courtroom, but if we do have it, we'll make sure to go to it because we don't want you to miss anything in that case. It was a really, really tragic case, but an important case nonetheless. In the meantime, let's talk a little bit more about the Claude Tex McIver case. Again, I'm here with attorney Jonna Spilbor. Jonna, I was watching Mr. Brown as we talk about this. Finances are a huge aspect in this case, so I will play devil's advocate once more. Isn't it bad that Mr. McIver, in the days after Diane died, was curious about if he could get her Social Security benefits, whether he could get her 401k. He sold off her jewelry and her personal items right after, including the fact when Mr. Corey, Diane's boss, said, don't sell her jewelry, put it in a safe deposit box for Diane's son. This seems suspicious, no?
I don't know if it's going to seem suspicious to people in the jury. Again, if I take my lawyer hat off and I put a juror hat on, I don't know. If somebody passes away and you stand to get a financial benefit just because that's how it works oftentimes, right? When you're a spouse and your spouse passes away, and he's an attorney, I don't think it's that unusual that he would want to sew up those legalities. I really don't. Whether he's entitled to her Social Security, what money he's going to get, what insurance benefits are coming to him. I could see myself doing that. And, maybe I'm not doing it the day somebody dies, but a week later, I don't see that being anything that's going to sway them one way or the other.
Yeah, well, we'll have to hear what the jurors ultimately think. I want to continue playing some more of the testimony of Terry Brown, Diane McIver's personal assistant. Take a look.
She had a loan to John Hahn, who is a U.S. Enterprise employee. She had a couple loans to Danny Carter. She had a loan to Tex. She had a loan to Ann Swall. She had a loan to James Hugh.
And are all of these people outside of the defendant close personal friends of Ms. McIver?
Yes.
And she charged her close personal friends interest?
Yes.
Okay. So her money was back according to her?
Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative.
All right. Sustained.
I'll withdraw the question.
Good choice.
And you said she made loans to the defendant? Ms.
Yes.
McIver. And did she expect Mr. McIver to pay her on time with interest?
His loan was interest only, so he only paid interest.
Okay.
He didn't pay any principal.
Now, you said his loan. Tell the jury a little bit about his loan and what the loan was for.
The loan was for $350,000. I'm not sure what the loan was, what the money was given to him for. It started January 15th of 2012. And he made interest-only payments. It was a 3-year term originally, and the payments were $1,531 a month. And at the end of the 3 years, Diane came to me, it was January, I guess, of 15, to say, I've re-upped the loan for another 3 years, and I've reduced his payment to $1,400 and something dollars.
Okay. So let's backtrack for a second.
And there's a spreadsheet for all of that also.
Okay. And is it in State Exhibits 201, 206 that you looked at earlier? Or would it be in that?
It wouldn't be in the checkbook registers. It was I had a file for each person that had a loan out, and each month it had the amount of the payment, and then I posted the payments as they were being made. Okay. So there is a spreadsheet for that someplace.
So you said that the loan was for $350K?
Yes.
And it was how many years?
The original was 3. Okay. And that started when? January 15th. The payment was due on the 18th of the month, and it started in January. I think it was 2012.
And it was 3 years from that.
Yeah, and it was $1,500 and some change a month.
And then you said that loan was renewed?
It was renewed in, I guess, 2015.
Why was it renewed?
I have no idea. I was just told it was renewed, and the payment was reduced to $1,400 and change. And I don't know why it was reduced.
No. This first 3 years, the $1,500, did any of that include principal?
No.
At the end of the 3 years before the loan had been renewed, had any principal on the $350,000 that had been loaned been paid?
No.
When the loan was renewed, do you remember what year that was in?
Should have been 2015. Should have been January.
Okay. From January 2015, let's say until September 25th of 2016, when Ms. McIver was shot, had any of the principal been paid on that loan at all?
No.
And the renewal, how many years was the renewal for?
3.
Another 3 years?
Yes.
And at the end of those 3 years, was the principal to be paid?
Yes.
Okay. And to your knowledge, on the 25th of September 2016, 0 principal had been paid?
Correct. And there's a spreadsheet to show all that somewhere.
Let's see right there.
Welcome back, everybody. So that was, again, the prior testimony of Terry Brown, the assistant for Diane McIver, the victim in this case. And again, this is all about Tex McIver, a prominent Atlanta attorney who is charged with the murder of his wife, Diane McIver. We're keeping a very close eye on the courtroom. As soon as the trial goes live, we're going to make sure to go to it. We don't want you to miss anything. But let's anticipate or try to assume what might happen today. Again, Jonna, we kind of saw the beginnings of the gun evidence about what this gun was like. And there you go. See, that's a live feed. That's the judge in this case, just presiding over the first administrative parts of the case before it begins. So, again, the question is, if we see more gun evidence, what would be bombshell evidence for the prosecution here?
I don't know if the prosecution can actually have a bombshell at this point.
Well, we know he shot her. We know Tex shot her.
We know he shot her. I would want to know the trajectory of the bullet. Like, where exactly was the gun pointed when it went off? Think about being in the back seat of a car. His story is, I had it in my hand because we were in a bad neighborhood. So it's plausible. He had it in his hand ready to fire because he thought he might have to shoot somebody outside the vehicle. When a gun goes off inside the small compartment of a vehicle, it's likely to hit somebody. You just hope that it doesn't kill someone when it does.
And we can't forget the conversation that was brought up by the defense about what mode was the gun set to. Single action, double action. One mode requires 12 to 15 pounds of pressure to fire. Another can almost be a hair trigger. And is it entirely clear which mode it was set to? Because if it wasn't, Jonna, that's reasonable doubt.
But that's true. And if he were protecting himself from outside influences, he could have that gun ready to fire. He could have had it ready to fire.
Right.
Not intending to kill his wife.
Yeah, and especially it's a little strange that a guy who wanted to protect the 2 other women in the car from the outside influences fell asleep with the gun in his lap. That becomes a problem. But again, I'm just analyzing it here. It's really
being that advocate for the
I'm trying,
devil.
Jonna. It's really up for the jury. So we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll jump right into the courtroom. This is the Tex McIver case. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to Law&Crime Live, everybody. And speaking of live, we are live in the Claude Tex McIver case. An attorney who is charged with the murder of his wife on the stand right now is a financial expert, and he's a CPA. He's a fraud examiner. His name is Dean Driscoll. He's being brought to the stand to talk about the financial position of the defendant, Tex McIver, at the time of Diane McIver's death. And when you're looking for a financial motive about why maybe Tex shot Diane, it's important to understand it. Let's listen in live.
Doing the exact type of work that I'm doing in this case. I have hundreds of times I've analyzed financial statements of net worth, balance sheets. Some of those engagements I'm reviewing those documents, and some of those engagements I'm producing them. But it's always assessing complex financial and accounting documents and matters.
And when you say the Big Four, what does that mean?
Well, the Big Four accounting firms are the national or international accounting firms. Ernst & Young. I did a stint I was actually at Arthur Andersen when Arthur Andersen went under, for those of you who remember back then. But they're the international accounting firms. And over time, it became very difficult for us to do the kind of work that I do in those accounting firms because of conflicts.
Okay, so as we watch Dean Driscoll, he's a financial expert, again, trying to assess Tex McIver's financial position. Jonna, again, we're talking about finance. We're talking about a motive here. I'm struck because wouldn't Tex McIver have been better off not killing Diane? That was his golden egg. She was bringing in a lot of money.
So many things about this part of the prosecution's case bother me, not the least of which is this. They do not have any solid gotcha moment type of financial motive evidence here. Listen, these people were not hurting for money, Jesse. It seems that they had a pretty comfortable life, right? And as you just alluded to, so he was comfortable with her alive. He would have been as comfortable, not overwhelmingly more comfortable with her dead. So it doesn't, when you're trying to prove a motive to end another person's life, you need more than what the prosecution's giving us here.
Exactly. And we know that Tex McIver, he had was kind of winding down his law business. Right. She was running 3 companies. She was bringing in a lot of money. She made loans to people. They had, I think she was worth $12 million at the time of her death. Doesn't make sense to me. Does it make sense to the jury? We'll have to see. So we're going to keep a careful eye on this courtroom feed. But what I want to do right now, if I can, if we have it, I'd like to play the clip again. This is the continuation of the testimony of Terry Brown. Again, he was Diane's personal assistant, somebody that knew her so well, knew about her life, knew about her finances. So I want to play you some of his testimony. When we come back, we'll hear what Dean Driscoll has to say.
Where were those?
The 2 condos at Kingsborough.
And when you say 2 condos, were they separate condos? Or was it one big condo?
She bought them individually, and then she took one of the walls out, so they were together at the time.
And had you had an opportunity to go to the condos?
Yes.
And did you go there often?
I wouldn't say often, no.
Back to the birthday parties. Who paid for those parties?
I think Tex paid for the petting zoo, and I think he paid for whatever the slide or the castle was, because that was an account that he had with someplace in Eatonton, even though I called generally to make sure that it was going to be available. That was Tex's account. The caterer was paid for. The food was paid for by Diane.
Okay. And while we're talking about money, since you handled all of Ms. McIver's finances, were they separate and apart from Mr. McIver's finances?
Yes.
And why is that?
She told me when she hired me.
Stop. Okay. Just when you hear one of the attorneys pop up who's not asking a question, we all put the brakes on.
I'll ask that question too.
Okay.
From the time that you started working August of 2010 at U.S. Enterprises for Ms. McIver until her death, were their finances always separate?
Yes.
Okay. And how would you describe Mr. and Mrs. McIver's marriage?
As far as I can tell you, it was a very good marriage.
And did you plan vacations for them?
Yes.
Okay. When you planned those vacations, was it just for the 2 of them, or did other people go?
There was generally always someone with them on vacation.
I'm sorry, the last part trailed off.
Oh, there was generally somebody always. An example, they took the Swalls on vacation once a year. They did golf trips, and they usually traveled with friends from Canada, or they traveled with friends that live here that golfed. So they were generally golfing vacations when they traveled, unless they were going with the Swalls, and then that was.
Okay, so that was Terry Brown talking a little bit about the life of Diane McIver and Tex McIver. We have a live feed again in the courtroom in the Claude Tex McIver case. On the stand is Dean Driscoll, a financial expert, who was brought to the stand to testify about the financial position of Tex McIver when Diane was killed. Let's listen in live.
Okay, and the PowerPoint, is it contained on the jump drive?
It was. I believe it's now on this machine to my right.
Okay. And have you had the opportunity to review the PowerPoint to make sure that it accurately reflects the data that you examined and the opinions you will give this jury?
I have.
Okay.
Is there a reason why it needs to be on that screen rather than these screens?
Because this screen allows you to enlarge the really small numbers. You can make them bigger so that the jury can see them and not squint.
Okay.
But it will appear on each one of these screens as Convery is going to operate that part of the presentation.
Excellent.
Okay. Let me show you two documents. They are marked as State's Exhibits number 479 and also 484. Do you recognize and can you identify those exhibits?
I can.
And what is State's Exhibit number 479?
This is a printout of my PowerPoint presentation.
Okay. And that's a complete copy of the PowerPoint presentation that the jurors are about to see, should we be able to have it admitted.
It appears.
Okay, so that's Dean Driscoll, a financial expert, really authenticating all of the documents he used to understand Tex McIver, the defendant's financial position at the time he shot and killed his wife, Diane. It's very interesting to understand those financial aspects. We'll take a quick break. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back, everybody. So we are keeping a very careful eye on the Claude Tex McIver case out of Atlanta, but we have a breaking development now out of Florida. It's the Donald Smith case. I mentioned it earlier. This is a man who was convicted of abducting, raping, and murdering a beautiful 8-year-old girl named Cherish Periwinkle by taking her from a Walmart. He befriended her mother, Rain Periwinkle, and right now, after he was convicted, the jury did recommend the death penalty for him. What is happening today is called a Spencer hearing. The judge is listening to further testimony and evidence by both the state and the defense. The defense is going to try to present some more evidence about why their client should not be sentenced to death. What I'm going to take you to right now is a live feed into that courtroom. The person that you see there is Rain Periwinkle, that is Cherish's mother, providing her statement to the court. Let's listen in live.
Cherish loved cooking and enjoyed spending time with me in the kitchen, cooking dinner and making Kool-Aid. Cherish would play school with her little sisters. She would be the teacher and they would be the students. She loved reading to Destiny and Nevaeh, and they would color together for hours. The three of them would play in the rain with their umbrellas while I watched from the front porch. We all enjoyed playing hide and seek in the house together as a family. Cherish's birthday is Christmas Eve. That day in the holiday season will never again be a time of joy or celebration. When other people are celebrating Christmas Eve, to them it is Christmas Eve, but in my mind it will always be Cherish's birthday. Cherish used to believe Christmas was a celebration of her birthday, and all the fuss was for her, but Cherish would share her day with her sisters, and they would all get to open one present on Christmas Eve. Since she was taken from me, we have never been able to spend the holidays together as a family, and I never will again. Since June 22nd, 2013, my life has been turned upside down. I lost destiny in Nevada and all my worldly possessions. I even lost my home. More than anything else, I lost Cherish in the most violent way possible. I will never get to see her grow up. I will never see her get married and enjoy life. He has taken that from me. And it can never be returned. I have so much rage. Inside of me because of what he did. I've never felt this much hatred in my life. I feel what happened has turned my family and friends against me. I see reminders daily of what he took from me. Every white van I see is a horrible reminder of what he did and how she suffered. Every school bus I see is a reminder of Cherish. Cherish loved riding the school bus. I would eagerly wait for her to come home to share her day with me. I feel the pain of losing Cherish every day. It has been 4 years and 9 months, but for me it will always feel like yesterday and does. The devastation of losing Cherish has never left me, and it never will. I love you, Cherish.
Your Honor, the state has no further evidence to present to the court.
All right. Anything further from the defense?
No, Your Honor.
All right. I'm going to give the state and the defense till April 26th at the end of the day to file any written memorandum that they feel would be appropriate for consideration for sentencing, and pass sentencing to May 2nd at 9 in courtroom 406. I believe that concludes the Smith case. The other cases that were on the calendar are all passed to April 18th at 9 in courtroom 405, and those parties have all been advised of that past date.
Thank you.
Okay, let's analyze this for a second. First of all, the man in the orange jumpsuit. That is the face of pure evil, ladies and gentlemen, okay? That man who's being escorted away right now, he was convicted of abducting, raping, and brutally murdering a beautiful 8-year-old girl named Cherish Periwinkle. He abducted her from a Walmart, first by befriending her mother, who you just heard her provide her words to the court. And after a very short time, the jury convicted him. They ultimately recommended that he be sentenced to death. Now, under Florida law, the jury provides a recommendation, but it's ultimately up to Judge Cooper there to impose the sentence. And the hearing that you just saw is an opportunity for the state and the defense to provide some more evidence. But Jonna, the defense didn't provide any witnesses. They didn't provide any evidence. I thought they might, to try to say that he shouldn't be sentenced to death, but they didn't.
You know, because some of that evidence was presented during the guilt phase when there was an expert who basically said, you know, what you said, he's pure evil and he was, essentially he's wired wrong, right? He's wired wrong. But the judge did also say that they're going to have an opportunity to present a sentencing memorandum prior to the actual sentencing date. Maybe the defense intends to put some of that information and evidence for the judge's consideration in there. This was weird. This was a little bit of a strange pre-sentence hearing where it seems all you did was get to hear from the Cherish Periwinkle's mother, who I was about to tear up. I mean, you know, what could she possibly say that wouldn't promote the fact that this man ought to be dead? That there is nothing redeemable about this defendant. He's the worst of the worst. He's a disgusting example of a human being. The jury agreed. He was guilty in no time flat. let's get it over with, people. Let's get it over with.
During his actual trial, for lack of a better word, trial, he didn't put on any evidence. They had one opening argument, but they didn't even do a closing argument. He accepted his fate. During the penalty phase, in front of the jury, they tried to put on, as you said, some evidence that he has a disorder, that he was born a certain way, that this is not something he should be blamed with, but the jury didn't hear any of that. They recommended death. But isn't it a possibility under the law the judge could go against the jury's recommendation, say that he deserves life in prison, but that's extremely rare, right?
Yes, the judge could do it, extremely rare. But you know what we can't do in this society that maybe we should change this? A defendant's not allowed to say, kill me. You're not allowed to say, I want the death penalty, and get it on those grounds. In other words, the judge still has to be the one to decide your fate. But he couldn't say, like, he would not be allowed to waive a death, the fact that he could get the death penalty. And I suppose, obviously, because we're trying to save ourselves from cruel and unusual punishment or what have you, but maybe, the reason I'm bringing it up is maybe he has resigned himself to the fact that death is an appropriate sentence for him, and he's not going to be fighting all that hard against it.
Well, I think at one point in the case, he didn't want to have life in prison. I think he realized that a child murderer, a child rapist, doesn't fare too well in the penitentiary system, and I think he wanted death, but as you said, it's not up to him, is it?
No, it's not up to him. But if I were a betting woman, and I am, this judge has every reason in the world to impose the death penalty, and I'm sure that's what she's going to do.
Yeah. Well, we're going to carefully follow that case. As soon as there is an update, we'll make sure to play it for you. It's a really, really tragic story, but as I always say, it's an important one nonetheless. So let's switch gears right now, and what I want to do is go into McIver, the Tex McIver case out of Atlanta. This prominent attorney who was charged with the murder of his wife, Diane McIver, and what the prosecution is trying to stress is that he had a financial motive. That is a live feed into the courtroom. There's a financial expert on the stand basically going through with the jury Tex McIver's financial position at the time he shot and killed his wife. Let's go live right now.
Now, this is when I saw deposits or transfers into his accounts that I could not identify. So I don't know where they came from. It could have been somebody gave him a check for cash and there was no copy of it, or it could have been a wire transfer and that I was not able to see what the other side of the transaction was. So that's unreconciled income.
But then you've got another category down here at the bottom.
I do. Those are transfers directly from his wife to his accounts, and that those were across all of 6 accounts.
Okay. And these are cash transfers into Mr. McIver's account from his wife.
Correct.
So in 2013, can you tell the jury what is the total amount of cash transfer from Mrs. McIver into Mr. McIver's account?
A little over $180,000.
And then as of September the 26th, 2016, how much cash from Mrs. McIver's account was actually transferred into Mr. McIver's account?
Almost $70,000. And you'll notice that number is almost 25% of the total sources in the first 9 months of 2016.
So in 2016, the total amount of all the cash that went into Mr. McIver's account from all of these different sources totaled how much as of September the 26th, 2016?
$277,177.
It's the number of cash that went into his account.
Correct.
And the percentage of that cash that actually came from his wife, this $69,000, accounts for what percentage of that cash?
It's about 25%. So what this slide does, is this takes the same data that I just showed you and it shows it to you graphically. Now, someone could critique this and say, well, you're saying that from 2013 to 2016, there's a 69% decrease in the sources of cash. And that would be a little fair because this only deals with 9 months. So what I did is I went back and looked and said, all right, well, if I took this entire year, what would it look like? And it would just go down. It would go down to 59%. But this does graphically show you the significant decrease of his sources of cash between the last year that Mr. McIver was an equity partner and 2016.
And this graph illustrates that the sources of cash for Mr. McIver from the last year he was an equity partner until the date of Mrs. McIver's death, it seems to decrease every single year.
That's correct.
Let's go on to the next one.
Now, we talked about the percentage of income or percentage of sources of funds that was from Fisher and Phillips. You'll notice that this number, and this number come directly from the same chart that I just showed you. So this is the actual cash that's going into his bank accounts. Now, the gross employment income, these are the numbers that Fisher and Phillips reported that he was making. So it would be the difference between what your company says you make, right, and the amount that's coming into your accounts. Sometimes that's a pretty big gap. But this is now an annual number. So I actually took all the money that he received into his account.
All right, so this is interesting. Jonna, let's talk about this for a second. Tex McIver's cash position significantly decreased before his wife's death, and we know that she made him, there were contributions she made into his account. What should we be thinking?
It still isn't doing it for me. I mean, this is what I'm thinking. He is getting up there in years. He's not working as much. I mean, most people approaching retirement, the income that you're going to make from your employer is going to diminish. That's completely natural and normal. And most people don't kill their wives over it. So I'm still not plussed by that. And Jesse, as we kind of talked about before, they're married. She makes good money. She can support the household. Why kill her?
That's a very good question. If she was the cash cow in the family, why kill her? But that's not up for us to decide. It's ultimately up for the jury to decide. When we come back from this short break, we'll go back into the courtroom. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to Law and Crime Live, everybody. That's a live feed into the Claude Tex McIver courtroom. Things are getting very interesting. We're going over Tex McIver's financials, and what we just heard was that he was deteriorating in cash supply by the time he shot and killed his wife. Again, if we're looking for a financial motive, that might be it. Also, it should be noted that he was making interest payments to Diane. Remember, Diane loaned him money, and he actually had to reimburse her for expenses that she incurred from upkeeping the ranch. Again, if he's losing money, he's not making a lot of money, he keeps having to make these interest payments, do you kind of see a motive? Maybe. Let's listen in live.
So now that we've looked at sources and uses of cash, now we can net them and see what kind of the larger picture looks like. So what I've done here is I've taken sources and uses for 2013 through 16, and again, this is as of date of death. And you can see in 2013, that number is sizably negative. So that means that there was more money going out than coming in. And it wasn't going to savings accounts. It wasn't going to investment accounts. It was spent on living in the ranch.
And so in 2013, the amount of money that came into Mr. McIver's account was how much?
$891,504.
But the amount of money that he spent in 2013 was how much?
$1,055,000.
And that reflects a difference of how much?
A negative $164,000.
And is this an example of more money going out than was coming in?
Correct.
So when we look at 2016, again, this is as of the date of death?
Correct.
How much money was coming in to the account as of the date of death?
$277,000.
$177? Okay. As of the date of death, how much money was going out?
$342,552.
And that reflects a difference of how much?
A negative $65,375.
So as of the date of death, he had $65,375 more going out than came in.
During that 9-month period.
Ask and answer at the
Okay.
I appreciate he's trying to emphasize a point. I'd like to do the same thing in my examination without getting cut off.
Okay. 2 points. 3 points. One for you. Handle everyone the way they get handled. We don't need to have to, just me, that. Mr. Rucker, 2 things. I think we're okay with the thousands. We'll get through this faster if Mr. Driscoll is able to say 277,000 instead of the remaining.
More money was going out than was coming in. So when you have 2 people that got married and Diane McIver was the wealthier of the 2 and he wasn't making as much money and he was making interest payments to her on a loan and also reimbursing her for expenses that she incurred, is this a motive for murder? Again, I'm here with attorney Jonna Spilbor. What do you make of all this?
I say it's a motive for divorce. And here's why. If he was losing money while they were married and she was still the wage earner and therefore the moneyed spouse, he would be able to get money from her in the event of divorce. Why kill her again in that situation? And you know what these numbers show me, Jesse? They show me if he's looking like he's losing money, that's great for tax purposes. That's great for tax purposes. It wasn't like he was living in a box. He still had lights on, a roof over his head, and was eating fine. So again, the prosecution's kind of trying to get to a point, and they're not quite making it.
As formalistic as this arrangement was between a husband and wife in terms of loans, interest payments, reimbursing her for payroll expenses, all of that, she was not as aggressive with the loan. She extended it. It wasn't like he was, begging her to get the money back. So I think that's what's interesting, is that as formalistic as it was, it's not so aggressive. Right. Let's listen in live right now.
What deterioration of cash means. So this slide shows you that, and again, I want to be really clear on the dates here. So at the very end of 2012 to the beginning of 2013, Mr. McIver, in the consolidated 6 accounts, had $165,000, almost $160. We'll use round numbers, $166,000 in his accounts. In 2014, this is at the end of the 2014 year, it dropped down to 88. 2015, it went up slightly to 102. 2016, at date of death, it's $24,567. That's a reduction from the beginning, late 2012 to early 2013, to the date of death of 85%.
And this is actual cash on hand?
Actual cash that's in his bank accounts.
And can you tell the jurors, what does this column reflect?
This is the net sources and uses that he received from his wife. So remember, on the sources of cash schedule at the very bottom, I showed you all the money that had come from his wife, and then on the uses schedule at the very last line, I showed all of the monies that went out to his wife. This shows the net. So in 2013, he received $128,000 more from his wife than he gave her. $44,000 in 2014, slightly negative in 2015, and then almost $30,000 in 2016.
And can you explain to the jurors this box here at the bottom?
Yes.
What this means?
So, as of Mrs. McIver's date of death on September 26th, Mr. McIver and his 6 accounts had cash on hand of roughly $25,000. If you reduce out the $30,000 that the net $30,000 that Mrs. McIver provided him during 2016, he would have had a negative amount of a little over $5,000 in his all 6 checking accounts.
And so without this roughly $30,000 in cash that was provided to Mr. McIver by his wife, based on what he had, he would have been a negative $5,000 on the date of her death.
Correct.
And if I asked you if you could give the jurors like a word or two as an opinion.
So without that loan from his wife, he would have been in the red. It wouldn't have been so good for his financial position. But again, if we're talking about murder and his wife is lending him money and she's paying for most of the expenses, why kill her? That becomes the question. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in a minute. Let's break down the numbers here, okay? So again, you're live in the Claude Tex McIver case. We're trying to learn a little bit more about the financial position of the defendant who's on trial for murdering his wife, Diane McIver. So again, I'm here with Jonna Spilbor. Jonna, these are the numbers right here. According to this expert, this financial expert, Mr. McIver overstated his net worth. He was experiencing financial distress. At the time of Mrs. McIver's death, he was cash poor. So in 2013, he had almost $900,000 coming in, but over $1 million going out, and that was a negative balance. He had another negative balance in 2016. And without the money that Mrs. McIver gave him, he would have been in the negative some $5,000. So when you look at a financial perspective here, a financial motive, these weren't two people that got married when they were kids, okay? They came to each other later on in life. They both had careers, Jonna. That is now starting to sound a little bit different once you see the numbers, no?
It's changing your mind a little bit?
I mean, it provides a little bit of a different context. If you think about it as they're two people who came in with their own professional lives, their own careers, and they came together. Yeah.
Yes. You know how I'm looking at it? I'm not looking at it disfavorably toward the defendant at all. I think he had plenty of money. And we have to remember, they cohabitated. So I can easily see where Mrs. McIver would be loaning her husband money that he pays back or doesn't pay back so that on her tax returns, she can get the maximum benefit allowable. I can totally see where that could be the case and how that would make it seem that there's some sort of financial motive. But really, you're talking about a businesswoman doing what business people do. And if the jury gets to see that, I would love, let's open up Mrs. McIver's books. Let's see her tax returns to make it all make sense for the jury. Taking it out of context like this is a bit misleading.
So, but if we take it from the perspective, I mean, we're assuming that, like, when they go out, they spend on expenses, they do certain things, that she's the one who pays for everything. But we don't know what that did to their relationship. So, in other words, if you have a situation, if you're Tex McIver, you're not bringing in enough money, and now you're dependent upon these loans from your wife, and you have to keep making these loans. She keeps bugging him about the interest payments. There can be some stress put on the marriage, but you said it before, that's cause for a divorce, not murder. Then again, we've seen people kill for less.
Well, he would make out as the unmoneyed spouse. Mr. McIver, Tex McIver, would make out if he got divorced because they were married for long enough where Mrs. McIver would end up having to pay him, we call it maintenance, it used to be called alimony. So those numbers would make a great case for that. So that begs the question, why risk what's left of your career and the rest of your life in prison when you could file for a divorce and be basically a kept man for the rest of your life when you're in your 70s as it is?
That's a good point. And then again, this all could have been an accident. Let's listen in live to the courtroom right now.
To say at the beginning of this slide is that in addition...
Okay. And some of Mr. McIver's assets, can you tell the jury what was the source for these numbers that reflect Mrs. McIver's assets?
They were produced by lawyers for the McIvers.
Okay. Regarding her estate?
Yes.
Okay. And these clay management assets, can you explain those to the jury?
There's a building that Clay Management owned, and again, Mrs. McIver was 100% owner of Clay Management. There was a condo, a car.
This condo is separate and apart from the Atlanta condo?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
There's a car, a Hyundai Accent. There's some ground leases. Now, these ground leases, my understanding of the way those work is that they're annual payments that are made to her, but I had no ability to find out how long those payments would be made, so I tried to be very conservative and just assume that it was for 1 year, and so I've given her credit for only 1 year. It could be in perpetuity. I just don't know. I don't have copies of the ground leases, so I can't analyze them. You've got billboards, and then you've got loan receivables. So you notice that you've got a loan receivable to James Hugh, you've got a loan receivable from Ann Schwall, from Phyllis Gable, and then obviously this is the $350.
All right, let's break this down. What was the financial motive here for Tex McIver to shoot and kill his wife, Diane McIver? Again, I'm here with attorney Jonna Spilbor. Okay, we can't forget the fact that when she died, according to the prosecution, Tex McIver received a $1.2 million cash infusion. We know that he got the ranch, and we just learned that his true equity in the ranch before Diane died was very small based on the bank mortgage he owed. So she dies. He gets this $1.2 million. I think it's from an insurance payout. We'll probably learn a little bit more today. He gets the ranch. Jonna, what do you think?
I think it's perfectly normal. I mean, listen, when you have two people who come together and they each have money and you build wealth while you're married, one of them dies, the other one is going to make out. That's not abnormal. And a lot of us, are still alive and kicking despite that. So, again, this is just kind of showing the natural and normal progression, for lack of a better word, of the financial picture of people who are not spring chickens, who have careers, who contributed to their marital estate, and then somebody died. It doesn't show that a month before he accidentally killed her, he took out a life insurance policy for $10 million. That might sway a jury more than this.
Right, and let's not forget, everybody said that they had a very good relationship. We had a couple witnesses who said that Tex was crying and very remorseful after what happened. So it's hard to fight that away, Jonna, hard to fight that away. It was great having you on. I know we have to sign you off, but we can't wait to talk to you again about this case.
It's always great to be here with you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, so we are going to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to jump back into the courtroom. We don't want you to miss anything because it appears we're going to finally understand what McIver's position was before and now after Diane's death. And that's really key here in trying to understand the overall story of what happened in this case. So we'll be back in a minute. Stay tuned.